discussion regarding CCWD's water treatment processes and water quality. You're up, Damon.
Damon.
Good afternoon, Directors, President Thomas. So I want to acknowledge that we do have some treatment operators in the audience this afternoon and folks from the public who have participated in tours of our water treatment facilities and
Well, who are they?
staff. So we have John Brown, who's the senior water treatment plant operator for the Jenny Lind water system, and Christian DeMasters, who's a water treatment operator also in the Jenny Lind area, and David Young.
Also-
Super talented group of folks over there.
Is David's also from Jenny Lind?
That's right. Yep.
So nobody was available from Copperopolis or?
Or
Well,
Path.
actually, we had, everybody is working on making it, so we might have some folks come in before. They all helped me because it's been quite some time since I've.
Anyway, welcome, gentlemen. Appreciate
Yeah,
you.
thank you.
Appreciate you being here.
Yeah, it's been quite a while since I've turned valves or completed.
You
filters.
better get right on that.
So, yeah, and right out of the gate, I just want to acknowledge Director Davidson and what he said. Recently, we've had some public comment asking questions about chemical dosages at our treatment facilities, which is what kind of elicited this presentation, because we recognize that not everybody that attends a CCWD board meeting has an opportunity to get out into the field and to participate in a tour of a water treatment facility. And so thank you for that, because I think, when you push information that's out of context, it can have damaging effect. And so this is also an opportunity for all of us to just review the different processes that have chemical addition at the treatment facilities and to talk about them from a high level. And so jumping right into it. So is this the way I organized this? Well, if I would have organized it now, I would have done it a little bit better. So there are actually two main sources of supply for our water treatment facilities. We have surface water and we have groundwater. And surface water is characterized by low mineral content, but it also can be flashy. So you can all understand that you can have muddy rivers during a storm event. And surface water is also characterized by the presence of bacteria, viruses, carbon. So carbon essentially comes from decomposing plant matter. It can have a low alkalinity. And it's governed by the surface water treatment rule. So surface water, everybody can imagine lakes, reservoirs, rivers, creeks, streams. Then you have groundwater. So you have wells, you have aquifers, and you have fractured rocks. So western portion of Calaveras County is in an aquifer, the East San Joaquin subbasin mainly, and the vast majority of the county is fractured rock. So you're going to have this variability on water supply when it comes to wells. Wells are generally characterized by little to no bacterial content, but high mineral content and high hardness and alkalinity. So you can all imagine well water, you're going to smell sulfur, you're going to have calcium deposits, and you're going to have to contend with minerals. So these are the two sources that we're dealing with here at CCWD. 5 out of the 6 systems that we operate are surface water. And the one groundwater source being over in Wallace. So sources of our surface water supply: New Hogan Reservoir and White Pines Calaveras River watershed water, Bear Creek, Middle Fork of the Moke, and then the Stanislaus River watershed. So this is an image of the Bummerville Reservoir in West Point. This takes Bear Creek water, and CCWD can also push Middle Fork of the McCollum River water into this reservoir as needed. So groundwater, like I said, Wallace Lake Estates. We have a couple wells over in Wallace. These are under the somewhat administered under the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, or SGMA, which was brought into law in 2014 and governs how the state manages groundwater aquifers. So 2 of our surface water sources, now let's complicate things. So 2 of our surface water sources somewhat act like groundwater sources, and that happens to be in the Jenny Lind Rancho Calaveras area and in Copperopolis. So we usually say both surface water sources have the presence of iron and manganese, but generally what we have to work with at our treatment facilities is manganese. So manganese shows up as a black stain obvious. I think everyone has seen in Copper and in Rancho, when CCWD has a main break or when there's a fire or there's a sudden onrush of water demand, the water changes color, blackish, reddish. And that's due to the presence of iron and manganese. And it's something that our operators, John and Christian and David and John and his team over in Copper work and fight, for lack of a better term, every single day. So we're looking at presence of manganese in the raw source. So for example, for July of this year, the average sample for manganese in the raw source was just under 1 milligram per liter. So that's, so I like John's analogy. If you do the red solo cup kind of image, so a milligram per liter is equal to a part per million. So if you have a million red solo cups, you have one that has manganese in it, and that's affecting your water supply. So it's really hard to filter out. It's soluble. And so what we do is we use ozone gas to make the soluble manganese insoluble. It turns into manganese dioxide. And the benefit of ozone gas is it also kills any bacteria or virus that is in the source water or in the river water. So you're looking at an image of the Jenny Lind Water Treatment Plant ozone towers. So we generate ozone gas by blending air with liquid oxygen and then running that through an electrical system. And so there's an electrical. Yeah, go ahead.
What kind of viruses would be in the water?
Oh, you're gonna. It's like a water
Something
test.
we would know or not.
It's like, I guess,
you know,
Giardia a virus? Giardia is a virus, right? Cryptosporidium, Giardia, what's the beaver fever one? Is that a virus too, or is that a bacteria? What's that?
Salmonella.
Salmonella, yeah. So,
Oh, interesting.
yeah, and there's actually action plans associated with different viruses. So there's a Cryptosporidium action plan that our treatment operators have to complete an analysis for monthly. So one thing I want to highlight here, and it'll come up as we look at the different processes, is that our operators are pulling samples routinely, but so is our online analyzers. So they're always grabbing information, and the state requires that we contain that information, essentially on a continual basis. So the parameters with which we're required to analyze, to understand the efficiency of the water treatment process are recorded and documented, and not only reviewed by our staff, but reviewed by the state on a monthly basis. And moreover, the state performs an annual inspection for our facilities, and they work to ensure that everything that they see in the data and they see in those monthly reports is true when they show up to the facility. And so that's always happening while we're discussing what our folks are doing all the time. Yeah.
What makes Hunter's water treatment plant so unique?
It does not, well, it's not
Yeah.
actually a unique fact, but Hunter's does not have iron and manganese.
Right, that's what I'm reading.
The
Yeah,
challenge with Hunter's, so there's, and we don't really cover this in this presentation, but the challenge with Hunter's and the Evans Pass water system is water supply versus fire protection. And that can come down to a water age conversation. So what happens when you have water that's been sitting in a tank longer than you would like it to is you can generate additional, what we call disinfection byproducts. And I'll cover that here in this. So real quick, ozone towers, those are stainless steel. What are they, 30 feet high? Yeah, and so water flows, they're baffled. So there's a baffle in both of them. Water flows up one side and down the other side. And there's round pumice stones set like a tree, if you can imagine, branches of a tree with these pumice stones inside that are pushing out just really fine bubbles of ozone. And it's trying to get as much surface area around the water molecule as it can. So the water flows against the bubbles of ozone into the treatment facility. Ozone is measurable. It poses more of a safety threat to our operators than it does to the water supply because it off gases and it disassociates really quickly. So here's an image of the Jenny Lind Water Treatment Plant filter, one of the filters. Some of you have seen this before. So this is the staining from the iron and manganese. I want to apologize to our friends in Wallace because in this presentation, I focus on manganese use at copper and Jenny and the presence of manganese and copper, but I don't really touch upon Wallace, which we We use permanganate, the chemical used to help us remove manganese at walls also. So this is another chemical that we talked about, ozone, a gas that we create on site. And then we use sodium or potassium permanganate, which is a chemical that we purchase to help us sequester manganese out of the system. And we use this in 0.0 milligrams per liter dosages. So if you had 1 million red Solo cups, you would have maybe a quarter of one of those would be full of this chemical used to remove the manganese in the water supply. So it's really effective. The challenge, as you guys can all recognize who live in those areas in Copper and in Rancho, is manganese likes to go back into solution and make friends. So we can remove it, we can turn it into a solid, and we can filter it out with our filters. So what you see in this image is the water is going to flow down through a multi-level filter, and it has carbon, and it has sand, and it has coal, and then it has rocks. It's essentially an accelerated natural process. But what happens is the manganese that's still that little bit, that 0.00 whatever of manganese gets out into our distribution system and it finds itself. And then it settles in the bottom of our mains and in our tanks. And then all of a sudden you have a surge of water demand and it stirs up say an 8-inch pipeline. All of that manganese goes back into solution and right into somebody's tap. They come home from work, we had an emergency, they turn the tap on, what the heck? My water's dark red. So we acknowledge that, we recognize that. We're constantly working to flush our system and to remove and reduce the presence of manganese as much as possible.
Just real quick, David,
Yeah.
in regard to the manganese, it is not toxic.
No, there is a secondary, what's called a secondary MCL, maximum contaminant level for it, which is 0.05 milligrams per liter.
Now, is that due to health or is it
No, that's
due to
for
aesthetics?
That's correct. Just aesthetic purposes. So it has color. I don't want to drink this
No,
colored water.
I understand. I
Yeah.
just want people to understand. I mean, I took manganese this morning,
Yes.
you know. I probably don't need to, but,
Yeah, right. Yes, the secondaries are always for aesthetic
but
purposes.
just another thing before, I don't want to sidetrack. Also, is there a standard parts per million? And is that what you were just talking about?
Right.
And that, but once again, that is purely an aesthetic, not a
Right.
health, it's not a health hazard.
That's correct. So for example, if we had exceeded the 0.05 parts per million in the water supply, we would report that to the state and the state would report that in our annual report. We would say secondary maximum contaminant level exceedance manganese. And that's another thing. I'm glad you brought that up. It allows me to touch upon our annual report. So our annual report will have a breakdown of all of the constituents in the water supply. And if they're not there, it's because they're not detected in the water supply. So if you see a list of minerals, sulfate, sodium.
Well, that was a big
manganese.
part of the discussion in the ridiculous online thing, was that they're not even checking for these things, which obviously that wasn't the case.
That's correct.
If they
Yeah,
don't exist in a report, they're not detected.
exactly right. Yep. So moving on through the presentation. So we've talked about manganese, we've talked about ozone. Just want to acknowledge, it's kind of a little bit hard to see, but in the image in the center, upper center, see all those are all little vials. And those are vials that represent a different location throughout the water treatment and distribution system. So water treatment process, distribution system. How many are there? 16. So 16 different sample points for manganese analysis completed every Monday. And so the bottom image on the bottom right, it's kind of hard to see, but there are stickies on those bottles that say backwash return, clear well, raw. The bottle on the left is the raw bottle, and you can see just discoloration in the water supply there. So that's raw. There are 60 different bottles there, could be from a tank, could be from a filter process. And so our operators are always grabbing these samples and then analyzing, in this case, the presence of manganese in all of those locations, and then adjusting treatment processes to better combat the presence of whatever it is they're looking to get out of there. So we talked about oxidation. So right out of the gate, raw water comes in, it gets blasted with ozone, and it gets dosed with permanganate to oxidize minerals and also to inactivate viruses or bacteria. And so this is kind of an image that shows an ozone generator on the left and the ozone air monitor, one of them in the treatment plant. So this will alarm and send out an alarm if there's presence of ozone gas in the facility, and our folks need to be aware of it. And then there's the same image of manganese analysis. So that's a key treatment process kind of at the outset of treatment. And then CCWD uses a unique process where we combine two distinct treatment processes, coagulation, flocculation, and clarification. I should actually say 3 into one unit. And it's actually attached to our filters. And so we use really small footprints for our water treatment facilities. And coagulation and flocculation is the point where we're going to grab a hold of all of the dirt and the debris in the raw water, and we're going to sequester it and then filter it out. So chemicals we use in this process are polymers and coagulants. So polymers tend to have a longer chain and they're more of like a weighting agent, and a coagulant will have a charge. It can be positively or negatively charged, and it usually has a metal in there. And so we use both of those. And what's really interesting, this is where the treatment process gets really interesting to me, is the image on the left, it says ChemTrack. That's called a streaming current detector. And we have these at all of our surface water facilities, and they analyze the ionic charge of the water supply, and then they dose coagulants and polymers to adjust that charge to neutral. So most dirt and debris has a negative charge in the water supply, most. And so what happens is this analyzer, there's a piston and there's a water sample that's constantly being analyzed by a piston and sending an electric signal back to this piece of equipment. And then this piece of equipment speeds up or slows down a chemical pump that doses coagulant or polymer. And that will then, the coagulant and will then grab a hold of all that dirt and debris and form what's called flock. And flock is, if you can imagine, dirty popcorn, dirty floaty popcorn. And it, all of these coagulants just grab this dirt and it starts to float out of solution. And that's the coagulation / flocculation process. It's called flock. And we take all of that and we sequester it through a clarifier that adsorbs. It's called an adsorption clarifier with a D. So the water, the flock is excluded through the clarifier by all these tiny 20,000 little, they look like lentil beans. And so the voids between all of these little plastic beads is where the water can travel, but the dirt and the flock and debris stay behind. And so how do we know that we're not pushing a bunch of coagulant and a bunch of polymer into your water supply? It's the measure of the clarity of the water. So what is called turbidity. So I believe it's still with the surface water treatment rule, you can't have any more than, I want to say it's 95% of all your samples have to be below 0.3 turbidity. And these guys, hats off to you all, are putting out a 0.017 turbidity out of the genuine water treatment plant. So you can have samples over a 0.3, and bottled water is generally what is bottled water?
I've seen distilled.
0.08, and these guys are putting out a 0.017 out of the genuine water treatment plant. So the image that you can see the ChemTrack streaming current detector. It's going to dose coagulant polymer as it analyzes the electrical charge of the water. And then it's going to go up through a clarifier and down through a filter. And then the central image is the 2 copper clarifiers are in the foreground and the filters are in the background. And I think some of you have seen this live and in person, this Jenny Lind clarifier flush in the image on the right. And that water, you can't really see it because it's almost black, because all of that sequestered iron and manganese that's been taken out of solution is being flushed out of that clarifier and put into a backwash basin where we allow the debris to settle out, and then we return the water. So we've talked about oxidation, coagulation, flocculation, and now we're into disinfection. So imagine the water is filtered. We've dosed it with ozone. Ozone gas is dissipated. It's killed whatever critter was in the water, and it grabbed some manganese and put it out of solution. And then the permanganate grabbed any additional manganese it could, took it out of solution. And then we filtered all of that out. And now we have essentially clean filtered water that is almost ready to go out and be used for public consumption. but we need to disinfect it. And the state requires that we have a measurable disinfectant residual in our system to ensure that should something happen out in the system, there's something there to inactivate any critter that could get into the water supply. And so for that, we use chlorine. We used to use gas chlorine, which is very dangerous. And we would basically take some of that gas, siphon off some of that gas and turn it into a liquid. But chlorine gas is pretty much going the way of the dinosaur these days. And most folks are using 12.5% sodium hypochlorite, which is essentially just household bleach on steroids. And so we dose this generally. I'm dancing on diving into the weeds and trying to be high level all at the same time, but I'm going to go here a little bit. So chlorine will have a dose, and then there will be a demand in the water. So now it's time to disinfect the water so we can give it to the public. And so there's a requirement with which that chlorine sits in contact with that water molecule to tell us, okay, it's safe to go.
The requirement by who?
The state. And it's basically a ratio. And so you take all these water quality parameters and you push it up against time. So if you use 3 milligrams per liter of chlorine and there's a demand for 2 milligrams per liter in chlorine, meaning that's how much was in that water supply that was eaten up because it was killing things, then you have a 1 milligram per liter residual. Then you've ensured that you've met your disinfection ratio. You can send that water out to the system. And so these images kind of show you, it's hard to see in the image on the left, but that's a tap, chemical injection tap. So if you're going to inject chlorine into a pipe, we use these long taps that thread right into a pipe. And then the middle image is SCADA system. So this is our system that we can use to control all of the processes. And those are set points for the clear well, and that's part of that calculation or that ratio for disinfection. And then the image on the right is a chlorine residual analyzer. So these are always pulling a sample of the water supply at the disinfection process, and they have alarms on them. So if for some reason the disinfection process runs afoul, this will send out an alarm and shut the entire operation down, and it'll call somebody out. There's also high-level alarms, and that will do the same thing. So we've talked about oxidation, coagulation, flocculation, filtration, disinfection. And then the latest and last in the round of chemical additions is corrosion control.
Damon?
Yeah.
If you could go back to the prior slide where you show the
That one.
the yellow screen in the middle.
Oh, yeah. Oh, the SCADA one? Yeah.
That clear well.
Yeah, SCADA.
Yeah.
Director Cicada and I have talked about this a little bit recently about how we have our internal accounting system, everything electronic and data wise here will be on the cloud. We were wondering, but this isn't on the cloud. This is on server
On premises.
service within the facilities. So you would be able to continue even with the power outage on our standby generators. You can process water, treat it, and continue to operate.
Correct.
Okay, good.
Yeah. So real quick, there's SCADA, and then there's the program and the brain that runs the treatment facility that SCADA interacts with. And then there's the desktop that we can interact with SCADA and the brain from. So basically the treatment facility is its own island when it comes to access, but we can access the integration component remotely. And so if we want to jump into SCADA, we can do so remotely, but some of us have different rights compared to others. And the brain can look at that information and determine whether or not it's going to be usable or not. And that's really to protect our systems and our water supply from cybersecurity. And so I tried to, if there's a lot going on, there's a lot to unpack with that statement, but just rest assured that there's basically 3 different firewalls that keep our system protected. And essentially their treatment facilities are on an island at the facility from remote interference.
Okay. That was comforting. Thank you.
But,
Yeah.
but all that stuff not that long ago was all manual.
Yes, right.
It really hasn't been, the technology has not been there that long ago. Those operators, I mean, it's changed dramatically, you know,
Yeah.
for the better, but
Right, for the better, yeah. And one of the exercises that's really interesting is to manually operate it.
Mhm.
Because sometimes you have to, because, you know, you can imagine it's just a giant living, breathing organism essentially, and there's all these different parameters that can run afoul. And so you have alarms or you have issues that can occur maybe once every 5 or 6 years. So I might retire by the time that thing fails again, and everyone's like, wait, how do we address that? And so our folks have alarm troubleshooting guides, they have alarm SOPs, and then we run basically dry runs to test, okay, can we run this thing as a, you know, can the 3 of those guys go run that facility if we have to? And so, yeah, but it has changed immensely.
I thought we had a contract with you that you couldn't retire.
Yeah,
Yeah,
be nice.
it's funny, I'm even talking about that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so the last chemical in the process is corrosion control. And so we dose zinc orthophosphate at all of our facilities. And really the objective behind corrosion control is any pipe, whether it be ours or the customers, that has the potential to draw a metal into the water supply. We want to coat that pipe and protect the water supply from that metal, whether it be lead, whether it be copper, whether it be some sort of mineral coming from the galvanic process, so galvanized pipe. And so we dose zinc orthophosphate generally around a 1 part per million, and the system generally has between a 0.5 and a 1 part per million throughout the system. So we'll go out and we'll analyze the system for the presence of zinc. That gives us an indication that the pipe is safely coated. This is really in consideration to older homes. So homes built before 86, homes from the 60s and 50s, if the plumbing hasn't been retrofitted, can often have older galvanized or copper piping, and we want to make sure that it's coated and protected. And really, the residents are protected and the water supply is protected. Additionally, we analyze for lead and copper, so we ask for the participation of our customers in that effort. And we ask that they take first draw 1 liter samples from either the kitchen tap or a tap in the bathroom when they wake up in the morning, so we can understand whether or not we have the presence of lead and copper. And that's through all of our systems. And that information is reported in the annual report. And there are action levels associated with lead and copper, which we are currently under. So just to recap, we treat both surface and groundwater. We use chemicals for 4 processes: oxidation, coax, flocculation. I should include filtration in there, disinfection and corrosion control. And then the did you know is Hunters, West Point, and Sheep Ranch do not use chemicals in the oxidation process. So there are different things going on there. And then Wallace is also uses permanganate. And incidentally, the mineral content in the Wallace wells is very high for manganese and for iron. And then all chemicals are NSF approved. So the National Safety Federation, I believe. Oh, sorry, science. Thank you. So there's NSF 60 and NSF 61. So 60 is associated with the chemicals, and then 61 is associated with the equipment. So it would be the paint on the filter, the paint on the storage tank, the bolts used in the filter, the gasket material, any of that would be covered by NSF 61. And then each chemical has a measurable residual. And like I talked about for coagulants and polymers, that's turbidity, or the efficacy with which we're filtering the water. And you can see that turbidity right there at 0.017, the flow rate of 40.41 liters per minute. And then the other filter has a turbidity of 0.022. Really, really clean water. So this is kind of just to bring you on a quick tour of 3 different treatment facilities. The Jenny Lynn system in the left. Hunters, you can see that screen in that image. That is that clarifier that I was telling you about that has all those beads that are sequestered underneath that screen, that you can see right through that water down to the screen. And then copper in the image on the right, a little bit of both, kind of a mix. Somewhat clear, but it does have the presence of manganese in the supply. And then disinfection byproducts. Didn't want to leave this topic untouched. So disinfection byproducts, in our case, they're associated with the reaction between chlorine and carbon. So carbon is naturally occurring in our surface water. It shows up from the decomposition of plant matter. And then when you dose chlorine, carbon reacts with chlorine to form what's called trihalomethanes and haloacetic acids. So one trihalomethane is chloroform and one haloacetic acid is chloride. And so these are regulated. So Jeff talked about secondary maximum contaminant levels. There's also primary maximum contaminant levels. And these are regulated in the parts per billion. So for total trihalomethanes, that's 80 parts per billion. So if you have a billion red Solo cups, less than 80 of those can have trihalomethanes in them. And then for haloacetic acids, it's 60. And so all of our systems are in compliance with THMs and HAAs. However, our Ebbets Pass system did have a hit in 2020, and we're still working to have that compliance order, it is called, lifted from the description of our water system. So while all the samples are great and there's no exceedance in any form, the state still acknowledges that maximum contaminant level exceedance from 2020 and makes us report it out.
Do you know what caused that?
It's so,
Too in depth?
let
Okay.
me see if it goes to the next slide. Oh, here we go. So the greater the presence of total organic carbon, coupled with the greater the presence of chlorine, and the older the water, the higher the level of haloacetic acids and total trihalomethanes. And so during that time period, we weren't having a lot of water use and we weren't turning the system over as quickly as we could. And so part of the change to bring us back into compliance was to unidirectionally flush. Let's flush all that water out. Let's make the water younger. Let's run the plant longer at a lower flow rate to make younger water throughout. And let's also analyze ways we can improve the treatment process and the distribution system so that it doesn't happen again.
Was any of this stored in one of our tanks? Could the tank have had a problem as well?
Well, so yeah, so 12 tanks up in the Ebbets Pass system, we are going to struggle with water age in some of those tanks.
It's
And-
because of their size.
Right.
They're
Yeah.
too big.
So
Yeah.
this goes back to that initial conversation of fire protection, water quality.
Ah.
You want to have a lot of water ready for fire protection, but you also want to make sure that it's wholesome water and it's healthy water. So there's this constant battle between fire protection and water quality, and it's somewhat unique to where we live.
Right, but the haloacetic acid, it's a byproduct of chlorinating the water
Right,
and storing it too long.
right.
But, I mean, the whole chlorination of water, when people talk, oh, I wish they didn't have chlorine in water. Chlorine has saved more billions of people's lives
Yeah.
throughout eternity.
Yeah.
You know?
Yes, we've been using it in the States since 1908. I think is what it is. Yeah,
Yeah.
1908.
Yeah,
So it's cheap, it's measurable. It's
so the threat of haloacetic acid, to my knowledge, nobody's ever gotten sick in Calaveras County, or to my knowledge, anywhere in California for it. It's another one of those things that it maybe possibly somehow could,
right.
but
So
it hasn't.
yes, you would have
But
to
we
train-
still have to treat it as if it's a serious threat.
Absolutely. Don't want to diminish the concern at all, but want to acknowledge the fact that you would have to drink about, I don't know, 10,000 liters over the course of a couple of days for years for this to have a measurable effect. However,
How many solo
It's-
cups would that?
that's a lot of solo cups. Yeah. So yes, water age is definitely a component. And effective coagulants and polymers help keep DVPs low. So when we use chemical addition, one of the things that we do is called enhanced coagulation. So there might be a conversation of, let's use just enough coagulant to ensure the process is effective. But the state actually asks us to use a heck of a lot more to sequester as much of that total organic carbon and as much of those precursors as possible. Our mission, protecting our water sources and supply and safeguarding the members of our communities. So hats off to y'all back there.
That's right.
Yeah,
Thank you.
absolutely. Thank you.
And hopefully this provided some insight into what we do out of the treatment facilities for those that can't attend periodic tours.
Damon, I have one other question. You've said a couple of times that the source of the carbon is decomposing plant material, but how about all the carbon that's been created by the fires? I mean,
Yes, great question. So the wildfires have a significant impact on raw waters and water quality, and actually compelled CCWD to receive grant funds
Right.
for a treatment process called an active flow process at the Gilliland Water Treatment Plant. Because initially, right after the Butte fire, that the water looked like iced tea, and it was just full of carbon and decomposed plant matter and minerals. And you can't, I mean, at least in my experience, it's really difficult to filter out the odor. So you get this smoky odor throughout the entire process, and really troublesome water to treat.
Well, also, it was all the chemicals that were stored in everybody's garage at 700 and some odd houses. I mean, all that stuff got into the watershed,
Right.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of the little cousin to that is the first flush. So when we have a huge first rainstorm and all of the water flows in, and then we're treating all of the, the dead deer lying on the side of the road and all of that comes in, we see an increase in chemical usage at our treatment facilities to try to combat all of that.
Well, I definitely appreciate everybody's work out there. I mean, I hate even having to bring stuff like this up because it's really just trying to combat disinformation that gets, a lie will get pushed around a lot faster than the truth will catch up with it. But I appreciate this report and I appreciate all the work that you guys do. And so hopefully we can, give the public the actual reality perception of what we do, what our staff does here. So I'm very thankful for your work.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you very much. Good job.
And I marvel at the knowledge that the field forces have.
To have,
And,
right.
and the continual education, because these things are changing every day. And so you have to make sure that our staff is prepared. And you've done that, Damon, and I think that's wonderful.
Thank you. Yeah, every operator is certified by the state and they have to complete continuing education units every 3 years to keep their licenses.
Thank you.
right, that's a wonderful report, Damon. I appreciate it. And
President Thompson, if I could just add real quick. Yeah, and I think it's a great opportunity. We should do stuff like this more often just to highlight the amazing work that our staff do. I also just want to point out, the maximum contaminant loads that Damon mentioned, those are not set by CCWD. Those things are heavily reviewed and fought over. And there's a long process that goes into determining what those contaminant levels can be, and they're conservative in order to protect public health. So those levels that our staff are trained to comply with those aren't numbers that we make up. Those are numbers that are handed down to us from federal and state regulators that we have to now figure out how we get there. But there's a lot of regulatory oversight in addition to the work that we do, and we have to report out on meeting those regulatory requirements, and we do, maintain those reports on a regular basis, both to the public and to those regulatory agencies. So there's a lot of oversight here.
okay, I think that we have some public comment on this. Please come to the microphone and
That way online listeners can hear you.
Take your time.
Susan Ross, San Andreas, California. My question is, does Calaveras County water contain fluoride? If I recall, it's supposed to be 1 part per million.
We do not dose fluoride.
And can you explain to me why not?
So any water system that is under 100, that serves less than 100,000 people is not required to dose fluoride. And so at some point in time, I would imagine in the past, CCWD would have asked its customers whether or not they would have liked us to dose fluoride or not. And would imagine that you said that the majority statement was no.
But it does help with children's teeth and enamel.
Right. Yeah, understood.
Ma'am, you live in San Andreas? Just, I would assume your provider was CPUD.
I'm on Oak Shadows Mobile Home Park.
Do you have public water supply? It wouldn't be supplied by us, just so you know. It would be, Calaveras Public Utility District.
Thank you.
Thanks for clarifying that, Jeff.
Mike Haskell once again. So the clarity numbers are excellent. How do they correlate with taste? So sometimes when I taste the water, it's taste stale. Sometimes when I taste the water, it has that like fishy taste to it. So how does the clarity numbers correlate with the actual taste of the water?
Well, that's a really good question. So, taste and odor are a whole other ballgame. So it
Is it a different process?
well, so it's a result of different constituents in the source water. And filtration and the turbidity is almost irrelevant when it comes to taste and odor. So there's something called taste and odor wheel that you can Google. That's really interesting. But there are constituents called geosmin that you can microfilter water, meaning push it through a pore that's less than a microgram in size, and you will still have fishy, musty, muddy taste. Generally, it's seasonal. So it's usually a condition of the source water, the plants that live in the source water, and it's most of the time going to be stronger in spring turnover or from fall to winter turnover when the reservoirs turn over, so to speak. So the warmer water the water on the top cools in the fall, and then the colder water on the bottom will kind of flip and it will become uniform in the wintertime. That's generally when you're going to have, like during that transition where you're going to notice that, but it's almost not related in a way. However, we are still curious to know that. So if you ever have issues with taste or odor, just give us a call. And then when it comes to odor, if you smell chlorine or if you taste chlorine, it's generally because the water is aged and the chlorine is off gassing. We don't want you to smell it or taste it. And that's usually it means it's at a good dose when you don't smell it or taste it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I would like to mention that at one of the meetings that I went to that was an aqua meeting where we toured the Metropolitan Water Facility down in Laverne, California. It was really very interesting that they showed how they actually have water tasters, that they process the water millions of gallons per day, and before they send it out, they have people that taste it, and if it's too clean, it doesn't taste good. So they actually inject some taste good element to it.
You have any idea how many times that water is run through a sewer treatment facility and then flows down to?
Yeah. That's another point to make. Most folks in Calaveras County are drinking snow milk. They're not drinking water that's been through the places.
Our water quality is it's superior to anybody that's below us, without question. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Well, we have, is that Director Ratterman? You have a question?
No, thank you, Director Thomas. I just have a comment. I wanted to thank our staff and realize what a difficult job they have at the water processing plants, and at each one of them is so much different than the other. I wanted to ask, do they do any cross training? I mean, is there? I don't think the exact same thing is done at one plant versus another. Do they practice backing each other up and learning what is done at different facilities?
Yes. Yep. So there is periodic cross training and sharing of information and tips and, hey, this works for us at this facility, try this. so that we can cover, yep, exactly right. When we have vacations or unanticipated staff outages, we'll be able to cover everything. Yep.
Well, I certainly want to thank staff for coming into our meeting today. Sorry, couldn't be there to see you and meet you. But I know what a great job you guys are always doing, and thank you, Damon. What a great presentation.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys.
Okay, any other public comment? One more online? Matt Roy.
Yeah, first I'd like to apologize for a massive mathematical error earlier, but at the same time, I would love to thank Damon for that wonderful water quality report. And I was wondering if he could enlighten other viewers as to how much impact the plumbing on their own homes can impact the water appearance and flavor and odor, because I know it does, but I don't think a lot of people take that into consideration when they start condemning water quality. Thank you.
Yeah, and acknowledge our customer service staff who are really on the front lines of that. So they receive so many calls, and oftentimes they have to navigate this very subtle conversation around customers' plumbing versus CCWD water supply. And so hats off to them for that as well. So thanks for acknowledging that. Yep.
Well, it seems I saw a report a long time ago regarding lead. And again, lead is not a significant issue here unless your house was built quite a while ago. But the report basically said that first thing in the morning, when you turn your faucet on, if you're in an older home that might have lead, that you need to let that thing run for a little while, and that lead will flush out. It will accumulate overnight in your faucet, and it's just much safer to let it run. If you live in an older house, you live in a, like he said, after 80s constructed home, it's really not a condition or an issue at all.
That's right. Yep.
Okay, making one more glance at the screen. I see nobody's raised hands. Anybody additional questions over here? Okay, thanks, Damon.